Hello, everyone. Welcome to Real Talk Food Safety.
Hello, everyone. It is great to be back here with Tia. We're finally together again.
Yes. Jill was on vacation last week. I had a baby in April. So we've been super busy, but we love this time with you all because, it really allows us to talk about things that really hot topics that's out here in food safety and in the industry, in the food industry. And we really just enjoy sharing our perspective, but then also hearing from you all. So please put in the comments where you're listening from and that you're here. Say hello. If you are listening on replay, please use the hashtag replay because we do go back and we look at comments and we interact with you all after the show.
We do. And I love this because, right, these are hopefully the conversations. Hopefully, you see these conversations the same way we do, I should say, right? Where these are the ones that we were hoping we would have been having more of while we were working directly with smaller businesses, medium-sized businesses, even sometimes large businesses, because
Absolutely.
right, they're the questions that come up and you're like, are we the only ones doing it this way?
Yeah.
What else is there? Like,
Yeah.
let's have some of these bigger conversations so that we can get it out here. Because if we don't, then we just sit with it and we aren't able to solve things. We aren't able to move forward as well.
Right, exactly. And then you realize that everyone is sort of in the same boat where we're sharing ideas, we're sharing best practices, and we're realizing that we're really not the only ones going through these different things, right? And having these different topics. And today's topic in particular around budgeting for food safety, having conversations around money and food safety is a big part of our role, right? Especially as we move up into the organization. You're always trying to talk through, I need this one thing. And people are kind of saying, well, is it in the budget? What's going to happen if we get it? What is it helping us to eliminate? How are we reducing the risk? Why add one more person? Can you not do this? We've all been through all of those questions, and sometimes we just want to pull our hair out, but we're all kind of going through it, and we learn throughout the years how to have that conversation where we can help influence the business, but then also ultimately protect the business and consumers, which is what our role is, right?
Well, yeah. And how many times have we had conversations or seen papers or articles that talk about how do we better speak the language of leadership? Which I always chuckle because, Tia, right? My perspective is, well, why is there only one language for leadership?
True.
There are so many different ways to communicate about things. And so, right, we often talk about risk. We often talk about like how do we translate problems into dollars?
Right.
But the challenge we have is often it's abstract. It's estimates, right? When we go to senior leadership and we say, wow, all these customer comments are costing us, 500 grand a year, they're like, well, where'd you come up with that number?
Right.
And we do it based on information or data, but it's always an estimate and it doesn't seem real.
Right. Exactly.
I always call it the monopoly money effect.
Right, exactly. And we're not going to dig too deep into how to communicate this to leadership, even though this would be a really great topic for us to follow up on in a couple of weeks. But we're really talking with business owners because this month we're celebrating small businesses. And we're really talking with business owners, people who own the budget, people who are thinking about how do I incorporate food safety into my business and when should I, right? That's what we're really focused on this month. And so we really today we're talking about budgeting. How do you budget for food safety? And I brought up that it's a hot topic, and it is a hot topic. It's something where people really don't know how to budget for food safety. But then it's almost like it's a hot topic in the sense of people are like, well, I don't really want to budget for food safety, or I don't really I care about food safety, but I don't want to put any money towards it. And we're like, yeah, you need to.
Well, and I think that's part of that whole abstract part, right? Like, how much does it actually cost?
Right.
And so that's where we really like to work with small businesses to talk about, like, what does this look like? Because the costs when you are in compliance phase, which we're going to talk about, is so very different than when you are in a moderately mature stage of your food safety, or your food safety journey.
Right. Right.
And if we're not thinking about, like, what are the factors that play into that and how do we plan out that journey, then it's an afterthought.
Mm-hmm.
And right, we all know that when it's an afterthought, that means, like, we it's going to cost us more in the long run,
Right.
because something
Exactly.
usually comes up that triggers, wow, we totally missed, budgeting for food safety. So now we need to allocate some funds because we don't want to be back in this position again. So,
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
mhm.
So, hi, Tammy. Happy to see you
Hey,
calling,
Tammy.
listening in from Austin, Texas.
Yes.
So, we would love to hear you all's perspective as well. So, please add to the comments.
Mhm.
Add your perspective, add your experience, ask questions, because this is what we like to do. We like to share information across the industry.
Yeah, and if it's your first time joining us, welcome. We do our Real Talk Food Safety show every Wednesday at noon Eastern, 11 Central.
Mhm.
And we are Jill and Tia. And what we love to do is really help develop and grow technical leaders, teams, and really that culture, because it all pulls into that, for the food and beverage industry. And so we're delighted to be part of this community and partly lead this community so we can all be here together.
Yes, absolutely. So, welcome. And so, let's dive into our topic.
Mhm.
So, those in food safety, we know that we spend money to help eliminate risk, reduce risk, protect our businesses and brand, right? So we're all about prevention.
Mhm.
And we wanted to start the conversation really just talking through what happens if you do not invest in food safety. And so for the people that's listening, you're in food safety. We know this, right? But for people who are thinking about, should I invest? How much should I invest? Should I invest more? Let's just talk a little bit on what happens when you don't put
Mhm.
food safety first, when you don't put the right amount of investment in food safety. You have a loss of brand trust and reputation, right? Like that's like we're going to kind of walk it up, right?
Yeah.
That's the bottom, is that you're building your brand. Something happens from a food safety standpoint, and then people don't trust your brand anymore.
Well, and I think that's a really critical factor, because especially when a small business, maybe it's a founder or a small group, they have such personal buy-in
Yeah.
to the brand. And not that you don't at a larger company, but often people, right? I mean, the blood, sweat, and tears they put into,
Yeah.
like, launching this business and getting it off the ground and moving it to the next state. I mean, that brand really needs to be protected,
Yeah.
because, right, we know that it can be a tough industry out there, and sometimes it just takes one hiccup to make things just not go the direction you want.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all know that it could be something simple that
Mhm.
could cause a consumer to lose trust in your brand. When it comes to something like food safety, that's even more complex. There's a lot of consumers that don't really understand what goes into it. But once you lose that trust, a lot of people don't come back because it is food safety,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and there's definitely, right, we've all seen different recalls or things have come up, right? We've seen where these brands, right, we've seen stock prices drop. We've
Mhm.
seen where they've lost market share. We've seen, we could always pick on, like, PCA, or, some, different companies that, right, I mean, they've had some major things happen with their brand and trust, and really going out of business.
Right. Absolutely.
Mhm.
And then that flows into the loss of customers, right, and consumers. And you kind of talked about loss of market share.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's your customer, like your retail customer, that's like, you know you're having too many issues. We really don't want to give you the shelf space until you can figure it out. And then
Mhm.
we all know, once you lose that shelf space, it's hard to get it back. So once, you don't want to be in that situation where you're having your customers say, you know what, let's take a step back. We don't really want you on our shelves right now. Figure out what's happening on your end. That's a pretty bad place to be in.
It is, and often because there's so many other things going on in the background. So, right, once you've got traction for some shelf space, usually, right, you're working on a line extension or another product that you're hoping to move into that space next to it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
likely you've already done some investment in product development or packaging design, or maybe you've even done some pilot, trials, but you've probably already done some investment. So it's not just I'm losing some shelf space here, but it's that potential that's supposed to help drive your business to the next stage.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then we all talk about loss of money and recalls, right? So, if you go through a recall, and assuming no one gets sick, no one dies from your recall, you just have to recall product back because something happened.
Mm-hmm.
Recalls cost $1 million and up. And
Oh,
that could be only for a few units. And for small businesses, that could break your business, right? And you could no longer exist because of a recall. And then that also flows into your brand trust, right?
yeah, and I would say 1 million is even on that's the cheap
Low end.
side of a recall, right? I think if we look up, they'll say the average is 10 million. So of course,
Oh, yeah.
I don't know the actual range with that, but even with that said, regardless if you have product liability, you're still looking at money out of your pocket
Right.
to cover some of the costs related to a recall.
Absolutely. And I like how you talked about the liability, and we're going to dive into this a little bit more. But a lot of small businesses are thinking, well, that's my co-manufacturer's responsibility,
Oh,
right? Like that's
mhm.
my co-manufacturer's responsibility. They're the ones doing it. But again, this recall is tied to your brand. Most of the time, no one knows who's producing your product, right?
Right.
Like consumers don't know that a co-packer is making your product. They just see your brand name. And that's what they attach it to. So, that's all flowing into your business and what's important that people buy your product, right?
Yeah. That's a whole nother topic. I always wonder if at any point will FDA ever require facility number, just like
Mm,
USDA, but that's a whole nother show.
that's a whole nother battle.
Yeah, and the worst, when we talk about budgeting, right? If we look at the far end of the spectrum, what if someone gets sick or even dies?
Right, exactly. And we all are following the infant formula recall, right?
Oh my gosh.
And which is, obviously, this is going to go down as one of the largest recalls and one of the most impactful recalls, right, in history. And so to think about what if that was your brand?
Hmm.
What if that was your company that's going through this? That's why we're here to help prevent things like that. And when you think about, which I don't know the company, I'm not involved with the company, I don't know anything about them. But when you think about what leads to a recall and you think back, man, we should have just spent that 50 grand or we should have just spent that $100,000. Is it worth what they're going through? We get the recall alerts, I looked through 3 of them yesterday or the day before. If we had just spent the money to do this, the extra time, which is money, right, to do this, the extra person to do it, would we be going through this situation that could cause someone to get sick, end up in the hospital, or death?
Yeah. And, I think one of the hardest things that we help manage and communicate is that no, while we can take many steps to be preventive, we're not necessarily moving things that like we're not trying to say you'll never have a recall.
Right.
Right. I always say it's not if I'll have one, it's when.
Yes.
Things change so quickly, not only in, the science when we talk about the technical side of food science and food safety, but also as we talk about we just talked about this, right? And some of the new materials and ingredients that are being used, like a
Yes.
lot of those are still kind of unknown, or we're still learning some of those and the interactions. consumers are always evolving. Our health, the things we eat, the things we do, all of those things
Mm-hmm.
factor into it.
Yeah.
And that's why as a company, right, we know we can't handle all the risk all the time.
Right.
The idea is understanding like which ones are the most immediate risks that we need to help manage today versus which are the ones that we need to think about as we go forward.
Right. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
when you are looking at budgeting food safety, these are the things that should be in your mind. These are the things we're trying to prevent, we're trying to protect. And these are the things to think through every time you say, okay, I'm not going to add that extra money here. You want to make sure that it's not going to lead to the things we just talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we actually have a comment saying, hey, is this the place to talk about how much food businesses spend on food safety? That is what we're talking about today. So welcome. We are
Yes.
glad you are here. And we're going to talk through some different factors. So it's not just going to be like, hey, a small business should spend 50 grand on food safety.
Right.
There isn't even a number like that to actually be able to share with the audience. Mm-hmm. Sorry. I wish there was. I wish there was something more concrete to say, hey, if you're a company that does this much business or you have these number of people, like here's a good amount to spend. You know, if we were making all the same products or similar products, we probably as an industry could come up with something like that.
Right.
But we have so much variation that we can't get to that specific.
Right.
But today, right, Tia, we're going to give some ideas on things you can consider when you think about what is the dollar amount that maybe either works for me today or that I want to build to so that I can manage these risks better or to a comfort level for me.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so when we, this is one of the top questions that we get asked from entrepreneurs, from business owners, how much should I spend on food safety? And we like to level set and say, most of the time business owners, leaders, they're looking for a return on investment. And typically they see things like, okay, if I put X amount of people on my sales team, I should get this much back. For my business, I should sell this much product. I should have this much savings, right? People talk about it in terms of marketing. If I spend this amount of money in ads, this how many people should come back to me, and this how many people I should be converting. But when we kind of mentioned it already, when we talk about food safety and specifically, we're really trying to prevent money from being spent in the future through a recall, through marketing dollars to gain back trust because something happened. And so when you think about food safety, you can't really think about it in terms of a typical return on investment.
Yeah. And I would even caution using that. And here's why. I've come from industries where they have done some kind of, I'm going to say, internal industry benchmarking on different costs. And one of the things that's really interesting is, right, we all strive to be at the top. Like, I want to be number one for yield or for, profit per person or whatever those things are.
Yeah.
But when we start factoring in things like what is the cost for food safety and quality, I just want to caution that lower isn't always better.
Right.
And so, right, when we kind of are looking at doing some of those comparisons, like return on investment or how do I compare to the rest of the industry, everybody has such really different products or different business models, different risk tolerance that I always want to make sure that those things are taken into consideration more than the actual dollar amount.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you are thinking about budgeting food safety, those are the things you need to think about. You want to eliminate the top risks that you are dealing with today and what you're going to deal with in the future. And that's when you're spending the right amount on food safety, right? And for your business, that might be $5,000 a month, or it might be $100,000 a month. It just depends on, like what Jill said, it depends on how complex your supply chain is, what your products look like, how big of a risk is your products, what have you done already?
Mhm.
right? So like if you start, which we're gonna jump into our phases that we've been talking about over the past couple of real talks. But if you are just starting your business and you're putting a little bit into food safety every month, every year, what you're going to be spending in 5 years is going to look different from an organization that has not put any money into food safety. And now they're at a point that they have to, it's
Mhm.
required to get into, Costco, Trader Joe's, Whole Foods. Now it's required for you to make an investment. That investment is going to be so much larger than an organization that's been slowly building their food safety and quality program to support their business.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we should dive in because
Yeah.
that even leads to like even this first phase, which we always call just compliance. That's
Mm-hmm.
the one where we like have to, that's where we're really, small businesses are looking at like, how do I make sure I'm in regulatory compliance?
Mm-hmm. They typically don't have a lot of extra money.
Mhm.
So when you think about a small business and compliance, they really are trying to make it month by month, year by year.
Mhm.
And this is really like the hustle. This is the grind of the business. And so we don't want food safety to put you out of business, right?
No,
Your
nope.
budget to put you out of business, but you need to put a little bit towards it. And this is, yeah, like Jill said, this is where we really focus on regulatory compliance. How do you put money in to start building those programs, written documentation, making sure you have the right organizational structure, right people filling out the documentation, the right training that's happening. Those are the things that you're really trying to cover, those bare necessities.
Yeah, and one of the things that I always think about, like, don't skip on label compliance.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you, Tia, but like, sometimes when I'm at the grocery store and I'm just kind of browsing shelves and I pull something off and I look, like, I get a sense of their food safety systems and regulatory compliance when I look at this label.
Right.
When I see that rounding rules aren't being followed, or
Mm-hmm.
that, you know, maybe ingredient, like, right, we all know like ingredients, and then you have to have your allergies, and like, there's an order for how things go. So when I see those things, I go, oh, how do we help make a difference so that we at least have base regulatory compliance?
Mm-hmm. And now, since so many I do that too at the store. And now, since so many brands are online,
Yeah.
I would even go online and say, "Oh man, they're not compliant here." Like that's how you. I mean, that's really like that's the bare necessity, right?
Mhm.
And it's something where at this stage you might need to bring on a consultant to help you, right? Help you do that very basic level, get you compliant, making sure your labels are right, making sure you have your HACCP plan built or your food safety plan built,
Yeah.
and that it's effective, right?
Mhm.
And that you're doing all the checks that you need to be doing and you have the documentation in order for you to be compliant.
Yeah, and really that's the thing, right? We want to be able to recreate our food safety story because that's what's the evidence to say we did the right things. And so even as a small business, that is so important. Because if you don't have that, there's going to be assumptions made that you weren't doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And Tia, right, a lot of people that we work with and a lot of people we run across, they are doing many good things,
Mm-hmm.
just not getting the credit. And so
Exactly.
in this stage, it's so important to really get the credit for the work that you're doing.
Yes, absolutely. And then, we like to call it audit trails, or
Mhm.
when an auditor comes in and they look at your documentation or look at what you're doing and you're not buttoned up, they kind of go down this audit trail of trying to figure out, okay, what else is wrong? What else do we need to look at?
Mhm.
When you're really buttoned up, it kind of cuts off those audit trails where you have that they have the faith that you're making safe food, that you're able to communicate that you have strong programs, and that's what you want, even from a regulatory standpoint, right? So you don't have to worry about that part of the business while you're trying to grow and meet people and get your product into the mouths of consumers. That's something that you don't have to worry about. You don't have to worry about someone coming in and shutting you down. But that takes a little bit of investment to do.
It does. And I think, once again, it goes back to that message that it gives to a consumer or an inspector or someone, an auditor. What it means is that usually somebody in the organization, whether it's a founder or senior leader, maybe like an ops, they usually get the food safety part initially, but someone cares enough about food safety that they're doing those right things.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
In this world where we're talking all about food safety culture, that's an important message that we want to be able to share and send to people.
Yeah. And when we talk about amounts, right? Like this could be $2,000 a month, $4,000 a month, getting things up. Where people fall, where they might need to spend more money, is when they haven't reached compliant, but they're trying to get into a broader market. And now someone's saying, well, I need to see all this documentation from you. And you're like, man, I don't have it. Now you're trying to hire someone to get something done in 3 months and 6 months, where it's going to cost you a little bit more than that. And so your budget might look a little bit different depending on your timeline, depending on your product, depending on what you need. But starting early, right, that helps your budget.
Yeah, and I think that's, such an important part, because like we talked about, usually in compliance, if we're small businesses or founders running, right, we're usually bootstrapping. There isn't a whole pile. So if somebody says, hey, I need to be, FDA compliant in a month, that is going to be a big chunk of money. I mean, we're talking what, like 20 grand. I mean, I don't know, but right. I mean, we're talking, it's going to be a lot of money, because you're asking for a lot of hours and technical expertise to build these programs, to kind of hand them over to you.
Exactly.
Versus if you start early, I think, like you said, right, it's easier to just do it in bite-sized pieces.
Exactly.
And that's what I love, what we do with the people we work with, because it also helps because we share some of that workload. And I love that they are curious and want to be part of that. And right, we try to make it as fun. We make it fun. I shouldn't say we try to make it fun. We make it fun.
Exactly. We do. And we work with our clients to say, we know you need this documentation based off of your risk. And these are the ones we need to start with, right? Like prioritizing, because food safety can be overwhelming, right? There's so many programs. There's so many written documentation that you have to read through. You have to try to understand, we take some of that off of their plate to say, okay, you don't have to worry about knowing ins and outs. We can build the program for you and talk to you about why you need to be doing these things, what actions you and your team need to be doing on a daily basis, monthly basis, annual basis. And this is why it's important. And then also how to have those conversations with your auditor, right? Where it's like, if your auditor is asking for sanitation, this is where you go to find that information. This is what you walk through. So we take some of that load off, so that really the business owners, the leaders, can focus on their roles, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's, so important, because once again, like, how many times have we worked with someone and they're like, oh, we're not doing that. We're like, and we start talking about it. We're like, you actually are.
Exactly.
So even helping people really kind of like take that ownership and be proud of it and really bring that forward. Sometimes it's just bringing that awareness, like, yeah, I'm right. Most of us are doing some type of sanitation. You have a sanitation program.
Yes.
All right, let's put that together.
Right, exactly. And the mentorship is just big in the sense of understanding the why. And that's why this phase is so important for us, and how we talk about it, is because this is really where you're getting to know the why behind your programs. You're investing in these programs, you're slowly building them, maybe quickly, depending on how quick you need it for your customers. But you really are taking the time to know the why, so that as you continue to build your business, and therefore your food safety programs and culture, you have that why behind it. And then it helps connect how much you need to spend for food safety, because you understand why you need to spend the money and when you don't need to, right? Like, we know that there's, how many times have we gone into a facility or talked with customers or clients, and they've said, oh, well, we've paid for this system to help us with our quality checks and our food safety checks. And I'm like, you have one product. Like you don't need to do a lot. It's not time for you to invest in that yet. It's great that you have it. Now that you have it, let's kind of talk about it. Let's kind of talk about what it looks like 5 years from now. But that's why it's so good to get that help early on, because we can also say, no, do not spend that money yet. Let's talk about budgeting in that money in 2 years, in 3 years down the road.
Yeah. And I think the other part that's really helpful for small businesses to understand is kind of it's the two things, right? The supplier risk and co-man risks.
Yes.
Because I don't want to say that, but I don't want to say co-man scare me. They don't, not at all. But I think that relationship between who owns the brand and who's perhaps manufacturing on their behalf is really so important to navigate.
Yes.
I mean, how often do we hear people say, well, our co-man has that? We're like, what do they have?
Right.
What actually do they have? And most of the times that part is unknown. Those questions haven't been asked. So understanding the risk that a co-man may be bringing to your brand is just as important, whether you're making it yourself or you're having someone make it for you.
Right, exactly. So you need to budget in that investment. You need to budget in having someone on your team or having a partner like a consultant that can really understand your food safety programs, whether they're internal or they're external to your co-man, or to your supplier, right? So that's the other risk that you brought up, is that many recalls happen because of suppliers. And if a supplier recalls something, then you're going to be in a recall. And so it's so important that you invest time and therefore money into understanding your suppliers, doing that initial risk assessment, staying up to date with their programs, right? Making sure you review them at least an annual basis. So that means you need someone to do that work, right? And the most cost effective at this phase is really to hire in a consultant. But if you have the funds, definitely get someone internal that can help manage as well, because you just get more. You get more there, right? If you can hire someone in, but if you can't, that's completely okay to spend the money on that partner that can help take a look at your food safety programs, whether they're internal, whether they're external at the co-manufacturer, and then absolutely the supplier risk.
Yes. Well, because how many times, all right, we know that having like a third party audit, or especially even a GFSI, is kind of the, I'm going to say, permission to play, right? Like oftentimes that tells us, hey, they've at least been exposed to some type of food safety system. But there's people in our community who are really good at pointing out that most recalls are coming from people or organizations that have GFSI certification. So that is not necessarily the end all to helping manage that risk, which is why, here when we talk about that budgeting to understand that risk, that part is what's so critical.
Absolutely. It's one of the reasons in our compliance phase that we don't say investment in a third-party audit or GFSI. That's later on down the road. And it's because the real risk here is around regulatory compliance and hitting those top food safety risks around recall management, traceability, HACCP, and so forth, right? Those are the allergens, those are the ones that you really need to think about. And we would tell those younger clients, right, that's in this phase, that, okay, instead of investing in a third-party audit or GFSI right now, unless it's required by your customer, right? We all know that we have to do things for our customer, but if it is not currently required, then you don't have to start that. You don't have to budget that in this year to get that done. But what we do work with our clients at this stage is really looking ahead, right? Looking at that strategy, how you're trying to move and build, and who are you trying to onboard, where it's like, okay, well, we know we're going to talk to Costco next summer. Then we do need to look ahead to say, okay, what type of third-party certification do we need to get? Or maybe you're not large enough yet and you're going to be talking to Costco in the next 3 to 5 years. we want to make sure that we're looking ahead to build that into the budget to say, this is about how much it will cost. This is the type of supporting documentation you need. This is a type of budget you need to build in year 3, right? Which is so much better than saying, oh, you need this year, you need to build in $20,000. You need to come up with that, right? Like that's harder than saying 3 years from now, you need to build in 20 grand to be able to do some of this work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it really helps to think ahead for, if it's 6 months down the road or if it's 2 years down the road, because we all know sometimes when those windows of opportunity open, we want you to be prepared, but you want to be prepared,
right?
To be able to, to capture that and to really, work that opportunity. And so I think that really leads us into this early maturity where, that's really where you need to start doing some of that budgeting to say, like, hey, I probably have a limited food safety budget or maybe even not one, but I'm probably going to need some type of third party audit. So what is that going to cost me?
Right, exactly. So now you're moving out of the, I just need to be compliant, I just need to pass my first audit type phase to saying, okay, I'm starting to move into a broader market and I do need to bring on a third party audit. And like you said, you should start thinking about having a limited food safety budget. You need to start thinking about, okay, how much would a third party audit cost me each year? How much is it going to cost in order for me to close gaps from the program we developed in the first phase, right? We've identified some gaps. We know we need to add more shelving. We know we need to maybe add more people to be able to manage allergens. We know that we're going to need to recruit some people or some technology at this point. Those are the type of gaps that we've already kind of looked at in compliance. And now early maturity is starting to budget those in. So, maybe you really need to up your maintenance PM game, right? You need to put in that budget and have those items in your budget starting now going forward.
And I like that you distinguished, Tia, between, right, there's this normal cost that you're going to have, like kind of the cost of doing business. It's kind of the maintenance cost of your food safety system.
Yes.
Even when in your compliance, you may not realize it, but when we're filling out those forms, part of that is just like I'm maintaining records for the food safety system. So even as you start moving into this maturity phase, you maybe are thinking, wow, okay, let's be real. There's a lot of records with food safety. Maybe I need somebody to help coordinate these things. So, maybe you have someone who's helping with that, or maybe you're looking to transfer some of that from maybe a founder or senior leader who's doing it so that they can do more non-day-to-day food safety things.
Right.
You're going to have this maintenance cost. And so that's going to be some amount of budget that's coming through every day. But now, we're also talking about like, what is the next incremental part that you need to add for some of those improvements,
right?
Just really move you forward on this maturity journey.
Right. Exactly. And that costs money, right? But one thing that's great about this stage is now you can actually start to budget them in. Hopefully it's not going to be a cost where it's like it springs up on you, right? A lot of people in that compliance phase feel like, oh man, I got to do this program, and it's money. By this phase, you're able to say, okay, I know I'm going to spend about this amount of money on food safety this year, and so you're starting to put those things in there. Typically, it might be embedded into other budgets as well, where it's in your maintenance budget, where maintenance needs to start paying attention to food safety a little bit more. It might be in your operations budget. Operations need to start paying a little bit more attention to food safety. And so you might start seeing those type of costs show up in that way.
Yeah. And in this phase, I think this is where we often see where people are really going, wow, I really need someone to really act as a point person for food safety.
Yes.
And this is when there's so many decisions to be made, because do we hire someone internally into this role? Because they're familiar with our company. They know the culture. They know the processes. They kind of know what we're already doing. Can they help coordinate? Do I need someone with more expertise, or maybe even just more experience in another company doing this type of role?
Yeah.
There are all these things to consider, because once again, we're looking at how do we maintain the system, but how do we start looking ahead to even improving the system and moving to that next level?
Right. Absolutely. And then people are asking the question, well, how much do I pay this person? Right. That's really going to be the main part of your budget.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all been with those businesses that's, really trying to lowball the person coming in from a food safety standpoint. And they end up getting someone that don't have the knowledge or the expertise to be able to really lead the organization the way that they need them to, or they end up with no one. No one joins the organization because the pay is not where it needs to be. And so I would say, obviously, pay changes across locations, right? Like if you're in New York City or if you're in Omaha, Nebraska, if you're in LA, things it changed with that. But you also need to think about, are you hiring someone that came from college that has a degree?
Mm-hmm.
How much are other companies at your same level? How much are they hiring food safety people? What is the title going to be, right? So are you hiring a specialist? Are you hiring a director,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that also depends on how much money you're going to put towards the salary of this person.
Yeah. And, I think it's just, reaching out to understand, like, because I'll say most of the job descriptions I see out there, I think, who wrote this?
Not
Because
a food safety person. Not
well,
a food safety person.
because often we are looking for champagne on the beer budget type thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, that could be a whole nother episode on like the value of a food safety professional.
Right.
But I think that's something that we need to consider, because if we want someone who's like leading food safety and has years of experience and has formal training, like those are competencies that we're not finding in the like general work skill population. And that's why, what are we willing to value that for?
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's an important time to consider, like if I'm a small company and I'm thinking about growth, maybe I am really excited to think about a director to help lead me there. But having some experience in this kind of realm as well, I also know that companies need to plan for how quickly they want to move in this maturity to be able to capture the experience and value that like a director type person is able to do.
Right. Exactly.
Because there's some catch up, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, like we implement something, the company needs to work through that to be able to really be to the next ready, where their people and organization are ready for the next stage.
Right. Exactly.
And so sometimes I see where, we have a director, but we're not able to leverage everything they bring because we're just not ready for that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's exactly, the organization is not ready, the programs are not ready, right? And so, that's what we also help our clients with, is understanding what type of people they need to onboard from a food safety standpoint. What is some things that we're still sharing the workload with, but who's the person that they need to bring in to help start taking on some of the workload and taking off some of the work that the business owner might be doing, or some of the senior leaders might be doing. So that's some of the things that we work with, including mentoring, right? So like also providing mentorship to the person coming into the organization to get them up to speed and help them understand top risks, because a lot of the times you don't need to bring in a director first. You don't need to spend the money there, right? You really need a budget for a specialist role or tech, maybe even. I've given advice to organizations that tried to hire 2 or 3 food safety directors, and I'm like, you do not need 2 or 3 directors in your organization. It's really just wasting funds at that point, right? Because you're not going to, like you said, the business is not ready to even manage 3 directors or 2 directors, right?
Yeah.
So it's like we help them understand, well, who should you onboard right now, and how is that going to really help, reduce your risk, be preventable to recalls and other issues happening in the organization or out in the industry.
Yeah, and if people aren't aware, right, our early technical leadership program is really designed to help kind of bridge this gap, because
Yeah.
really it's a gap.
Hmm.
And so whether it's something we're using in this early maturity stage, or even as we talk about moderate maturity,
Yeah.
helping transition people that are in food safety and are technical experts into leadership roles,
Hmm.
right? That's a transition. It need
Right.
We all benefit from having some mentorship and some structure around that, so we have the success that we want them to have, so that we can help, once again, minimize, manage those risks as our organization.
Absolutely. This is like key time for our technical leadership program, right? Like this is the key time to take on something like that and really really start developing those leadership skills, those
Mhm.
soft skills in your teams. We kind of talked about it. If you start early, the less money that you spend versus once you are full blown moderate maturity and have a team of 5 or have a team of 10, and no one's working well together, or they don't know how to work well together in order to continue to push your food safety culture forward.
Yeah, I think that's one of those big parts, because, right, creating where we go next and what that strategy looks like to grow with the business is very different than having technical expertise.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, you can't have one without the other if you're growing food safety, and that's why it's really this unique blend of skills. And right, so many I see so many people that like they can easily step into this. They just need some guidance, and
Right.
maybe someone to help kind of mentor or ask questions, and a community. And that really kind of helps you, right? That helps with the maturity as we move up.
Absolutely. And so when we think about our third phase of moderate maturity, at this point, we are really starting to work with food safety teams. So
Mhm.
when you think about your budgeting, you think about, okay, I maybe have been working with a consultant to help build my program, share that workload. I might have one person on staff. And so I really have this limited food safety budget. Now you're starting to get into a dedicated food safety budget. So as your programs grow, as your business grow, as you start to really reach into regional and national markets, you really should have a dedicated food safety budget for staff, for people development, those leadership
Mhm.
skills development, right? That you should be doing not just with your food safety team and your technical teams, but also throughout your organization. That should be a part of the budgeting for your food safety. And then now you're also starting to move into that GFSI certification. You're
Mhm.
in national markets. It's probably a requirement at this point. And so now you're starting to invest in those bigger programs, and therefore you're starting to invest in closing even larger gaps, or
Mhm.
gaps that going through a GFSI certification will start to identify, because you're trying to become compliant to that scheme, right? So you're going to have some gaps there, that you need to invest in and start to budget for year after year.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think one of the things that I found most valuable when I was in a director role was having some support to move through this phase.
Yes.
Because once again, I came from a technical background. I'm such a nice person, and I'm smart, I'm likable, right? But I don't know everything. I know,
Right.
and you know how it goes. The more we know, the more we know we don't know. And
True.
so, especially coming to this stage and being a director, wow, what a game changer it was to have some even more, I'm going to say, more focused support, coaching. Really, it was coaching to help me navigate, like, how do I really step into leading my team better?
Right.
How do I focus on kind of bridging that gap between what my organization needs to grow versus how I bring the technical side to really fill in those spaces?
Right, exactly. And it's really long-term strategy work,
Mhm.
right? It's developing my leadership skills. It's understanding what leadership skills I need to develop in my team. It's understanding how do I build that strategy and have those conversations year after year. So at this point, you're not just thinking year to year. Your business is not just thriving year to year. Now you're starting to think 3, 5, maybe even 10 years out. Some organizations that should be our fourth phase of world class, they might be sitting at moderate maturity and they might have been around for 100 years, right? Like, so they might be thinking 10 to 25 years out. Mm-hmm. But what everyone has in common here is that they really have this dedicated food safety budget, and they're really starting to put funds year after year into this budget to help grow their technical skills, to help grow their leadership skills of their technical teams, and really start to close those large gaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I often like to think, because even if we are at a GFSI certification, or we often hear of like, well, industry standards or best in class, once again, I always caution the benchmarking, because it may be best in class. Is it best for your organization? Is it best for your team? Is it best for your product, so that you can really grow into the organization that you want to be, which really pushes us into that world-class status.
Right, exactly. You are starting to look at, who do I want to be and what do I need to invest in order to get there? That's where your food safety budget is coming into play, right? That's when you start to say, okay, who do we want to be in 5 years? And then how do we get there? How much money do we need to put into food safety in order to get there? Yeah. Now, also notice we're starting to talk about food safety budget a little bit differently. We're no longer starting to talk about top risk, even though that's what you have spent your money on up to this point. That's what you continue to spend your money on as you identify large risks. But now your mindset is starting to switch a little bit. And we like to call it a will do mindset. Now you're starting to put together a budget on how do we grow our culture? How do we do more than industry standards, more than quote unquote best in class? How do we become the organization that we want to be, that we need to be for our consumers? And that is spending money on food safety above and beyond compliance.
Mm-hmm. And I often think of this stage, once again, you and I, the different experience we've had, right? Like, we know we've gone home from places and been like, oh, what's going to show up tomorrow?
Right.
These are the stages where we're like, no, I feel confident in what we're doing. Like, there's not going to be some massive fire going on. Mm-hmm. We've invested so that we not only have minimized risks, but with that comes some of that peace of mind. Right. It is that confidence that our systems are truly working. Like, they are hard to break.
Yes.
It's not just we hope they run right. Like, no, they're actually hard to break. That's why I have this risk reduction. This is why I've mitigated these things. This is why my team hopefully is in a space where we're more engaged and our well-being has even shifted, because we have shifted our culture into this space.
Right. Absolutely. So you're spending that budget on maintaining your systems, ensuring that your team is growing and that they have these leadership skills, and like you said, their well-being. You're literally investing in their well-being. You're investing in the strategy into the future of food safety, and you're really investing to continue. It's really continuous improvement. At this point, you are starting to invest in continuous improvement of your system, and there should always be something that you are looking to do better each year. That's why it's a dedicated food safety budget at this point.
Yeah, and this is why the ROI doesn't always apply, right? Because we know that there are some I'm going to say soft links, but we know, we are logical thinking beings that know if we invest in these things, that all accumulates into better products, stronger organizations.
Right.
Like it all goes up.
Exactly.
And so that's why sometimes the ROI isn't always the metric that we should use to say, is this worth investing?
Exactly. And then once you hit world class, our fourth phase, ROI is not really a part of the conversation at all. And people start to think about food safety as being an essential budget. So typically, you would see that food safety is a percentage of the company's overall budget. And that could look different at different organizations and your risk and the size and that type of thing. But say that your essential budget, food safety, is 10%. Each year of your total budget, 10% of those operating funds are going to go to food safety, and it's going to go to continuous improvement. It's going to go to maintaining. It's going to go to developing your teams and making sure that they have the right technical skills in order to do the role, and the right leadership skills in order to do the role. the right type of focus on strategy in order to think about the future and plan for the future. It might be at this point you're buying equipment that comes from that essential budget each year. Yeah, like this is really where you start to thrive in that food safety culture, right? And people don't think about people think about the money, but people think people don't have to necessarily start coming up with like how much money is the organization going to put towards food safety. Now you're going to have, of course, the conversation around like, well, what should we be spending the money on, right? But the organization has put aside food safety funds. And if something urgent comes up, the organization can pivot to put money to food safety so that they can eliminate that risk immediately.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge point because I've worked with companies where they're like, well, it's going to cost us 50 grand to fix the roof. We don't have that budgeted. And I'm like, yeah, but I think your company reported earnings of like, $13 million last quarter. So that tells me a lot about how food safety is valued.
Right.
And I know that seems maybe a little bit ticky-tacky, but to me, it does. It tells me that I got this big payout over here, but yet the roof that's leaking, that's going to lead to a bigger issue. And I'm going to have like unplanned downtime when that puppy hits my line.
Right.
Like that's going to be a bigger cost in the end.
Exactly. Yeah. So
I think it also represents some of a shift. And I think considering the business models that some organizations adopt, things like zero-based budgeting often are reflective of earlier stage maturities because, right, if I don't need that for food safety, it's not making the budget.
Right.
And so I think even, as leaders are looking at how we're structuring an organization, whether it's, org charts or whether it's how we do accounting or budgeting, it's also good to pay attention to how those influence the messaging and how we move food safety and food safety culture forward.
Right, exactly. And we help our clients understand that and understand how that connects to food safety culture, right? And understand how people see your food safety because of those conversations and because of the things that are happening and how you're investing and spending your money. That's a huge piece of what we do for organizations that are in this phase or moving towards this phase.
Yeah. I think, right, we could talk about this all day. And I just looked and I'm like, we only have 3 minutes left in this hour.
Yeah, a lot of information, right? A lot to think about as you're budgeting.
Yeah, and as you've been listening in, whether you're live with us, we love having you. Whether you're here on the replay, we love that too.
Yes.
You can certainly drop a comment, but we clearly love to talk about this and some of the factors that are very specific to perhaps your business or your products. Yeah. So let me put this up here, right? So we can get our email. The other thing is you can always email us at hello@foodsafetykatalyst.com. And we can have further conversation about in these areas to see where you're at or maybe where you want to be.
Right. And how much you should be budgeting for food safety for your organization. And as you can see, it depends on where you are, but no matter what, you need to be putting funds towards food safety. And it is absolutely crucial and a necessity for you to do that at the start of your organization. It always blows my mind when someone's making food and they have no one in food safety. They don't have a consultant. They don't have anyone on staff. And I'm thinking, you make food. Food safety is the number one, priority. And so it's so important for you to realize that you definitely need to invest in food safety, and that investment increases as your business grows.
Yeah. And we can definitely post that email in the chat after we're done today. We'll put that on over there. So
absolutely.
Yeah. And next week, if you are curious what it takes to get into a Target, into a Walmart, into some of those retailers that people look at and think, I've made it. Like my product, like it has grown, my business has grown, like I've made it. you won't want to miss next week. We
Mm-mm.
have Ann Anderson from Retail Partner Solutions, and
Yes.
this is what she does day in and day out, helping small businesses and companies kind of reach that dream if that's the dream that you have.
Yeah.
And so we can't wait to just soak up the wisdom and the stories that Ann has for us next week.
Yes, we're super excited about that. And, that will round out Small Business Month. So we're super excited about it, celebrating it and sharing these tips and talking through each of these topics that are so dear to us. And so we're happy you were able to join us today. We will see you next week.
Yes. Make it a great day.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.